Hello, and welcome to Planetside 2. In the last episode, we finished up all of the beginner concepts in the game that will help you get stuck right into the game and having some fun. In this video, we're going to start assuming you've been playing for a while and you're interested in getting better at the game. So the first and probably easiest thing to improve on is your aiming skills with infantry weapons. This is where weapon recoil management comes into play. Okay, so we're here in VR training, and to start, I've adjusted my graphics settings to visualize bullet holes. But before I do anything, I've got a link in the description to a third-party wiki site that I would recommend using to get information on any weapon you want. The reason being that the in-game weapon accuracy stats, these ones here, only provide you with 2 of the 8 numbers that are critical in understanding how your weapon behaves while firing. The wiki site has a search bar at the top where you can simply type the name of the weapon you want information on, and it should be the first result. I'll be using the TR's Track 5 because it's a good weapon to demonstrate all of the mechanics with. Okay, now that that's out of the way, the first thing I'm going to do is just spray an entire magazine of bullets into a wall without moving my mouse, and then we'll break down everything that's happening in the few seconds of footage. Okay, so let's look at what's happening before I even shoot my first bullet. You can see that when our weapon is resting at our hip, we have 4 white dashes on our screen that represent the weapon's cone of fire. But what's cone of fire? If you were to connect the 4 little white dashes of your crosshair with a circle, it would represent the base of a cone that's tip is the end of your gun barrel. When you shoot a bullet, it will exit your barrel at a random angle, but the angle is always restricted by your weapon's current cone of fire. This is represented by the standstill hip number under the accuracy section of your weapon's information. You can see that when we aim down our sights, we can see that the crosshair tightens up to a smaller cone of fire before it disappears so that we can actually see what we're shooting at. This is your cone of fire rapidly shrinking to your weapon's aiming cone of fire. This is represented by the standstill aim number under the accuracy section of your weapon's information. Okay, it's finally time for the first 5 bullets. You can see that the first bullet lands practically exactly on your crosshair. But the next 4 bullets don't. There are actually 4 things that are happening here that need to be explained. First, the crosshair is moving. Every time a bullet leaves your gun, the weapon will move an angular distance equal to your weapon's vertical recoil value. The Track 5 has a vertical recoil of 0.3, which means every bullet you shoot will move your crosshair 0.3 degrees away from where you were originally aiming. Second, the direction of that movement will be dictated by the range of your weapon's recoil angle. The Track 5 has a minimum recoil angle of 23 degrees and a maximum angle of 25 degrees, which means that vertical recoil of the weapon will always be between 23 and 25 degrees to the right of straight up. Third, it might be hard to see, but the first shot actually has more recoil than the next 4. This is because the Track 5 has a first shot recoil multiplier of 2.35 times. This means that the vertical recoil of the first shot is multiplied in magnitude by 2.35 times every time you start shooting the weapon. Lastly, you might also be able to notice that the crosshair isn't moving in a perfectly straight line. Every weapon will randomly jiggle from side to side every time a shot is fired. The magnitude of the angular horizontal movement is dictated by the horizontal recoil of your weapon. but your weapon has a limit to how many times it will jiggle in one direction before it will be forced back towards center. This is dictated by your weapon's horizontal tolerance. If your weapon's horizontal recoil additively exceeds half of your weapon's horizontal tolerance, the next horizontal recoil will be forced back to center. For example, the Track 5 has a horizontal recoil of 0.225 and a horizontal tolerance of 0.55. If I shoot a single bullet, the Track 5 will recoil randomly either left or right 0.225 degrees. If I continue shooting a second bullet, the Track 5 will still be able to recoil in both directions, because the horizontal recoil angle from the previous shot has not yet exceeded half of the horizontal recoil angle. But if the second shot recoiled in the same direction as the first, the third shot will have to recoil in the opposite direction because the cumulative horizontal recoil would now be 0.55 degrees away from center, which is more than half of the horizontal tolerance of the weapon. Now let's look at what's happening for the remainder of the bullets. You can see that the more bullets we shoot, the further their impacts are getting from your reticle. This is because the cone of fire of the weapon is increasing by the bloom value every time a shot is fired. The Track 5 has a bloom per shot of 0.05 degrees while aiming. This means that by the time you've shot your 20th bullet, your cone of fire would be 0.1 starting cone of fire plus 0.05 times 20, which would be a total of 1.1 degrees, which is 11 times less accurate than your first bullet. Lastly, we can see that when we finish shooting, our crosshair will automatically return to the original shooting position. The speed at which it returns to this position is dictated by the weapon's recoil decrease. The Track 5 has a recoil decrease of 18, which means it returns to the starting position at a speed of 18 degrees per second. Okay, now that you know the mechanics of shooting, let's talk a little bit about how to control that recoil and cone of fire. First, let's look at recoil control. The idea of recoil control is you want to negate your weapon's recoil by dragging your mouse at the same speed as the recoil but in the opposite direction. You can experiment in VR training with how quickly you need to move your mouse until you can keep your crosshair on the target for a satisfactory amount of time. Get a feel for the average angle you need to compensate for and stick to that angle. If you start trying to correct for horizontal recoil, you're going to have a bad time. So just compensate for the average recoil and start practicing that muscle memory. Also, remember that your weapon has a first shot recoil multiplier. There are two ways to compensate for it. Most people compensate for it by aiming slightly lower than their target and allowing the first shot recoil to carry their aim up to their desired location. Others try to jab their mouse down for the first shot before starting their smooth recoil control for consecutive shots. Now let's talk about cone of fire control. All you need to do to reset your cone of fire is briefly stop shooting. This is called bursting and allows your shots to stay accurate. But obviously, as soon as you lift your finger off the trigger, you're losing potential damage output. So it really takes a lot of practice to know whether accuracy or damage is more important in a given situation. Okay, now that you know about recoil compensation and bursting, let's talk about some edge cases that might happen and how to try to avoid them. First, if you start shooting from the hip and then aim while still shooting, your weapon's cone of fire will still be huge. To prevent this, simply wait a brief moment while bringing your weapon up to shoot before shooting. If you accidentally do start shooting prematurely, simply stop shooting and allow your cone of fire to reset as per bursting. Second, the magnification of your scope will change how much you need to move your mouse to compensate for the recoil. So make sure you're practicing your aim to learn that muscle memory with the same scope that you intend to use on the battlefield. Third, the automatic recentering of your crosshair after a burst can really hurt your tracking of a moving target while bursting. To demonstrate, I'm just going to drag my mouse directly to the left, and I want you to pay close attention to where my crosshair ends up after the automatic recentering. You can see that it's to the left of where I started shooting, but it still compensated all of that vertical recoil. So make sure you keep that in mind when deciding to lift your finger off the trigger to regain that precious cone of fire, because it might just completely throw your aim off. If you have any other tips for peculiar recoil compensation and/or cone of fire quirks, leave them in the comments section below. But what if aiming isn't your problem? What if your problem is that you're getting surrounded by enemies all the time, or you're constantly walking into situations where you're outnumbered? Well, to find out how to avoid getting caught out of position or walking straight into a meat grinder, you'll have to watch the next episode where I'll be covering positioning.